Very excited. I have a friend that it seems to make more sense than most other people out there, and it's because he's somebody who has extraordinary critical thinking skills. He's a skeptic in the best way possible, and I think we need way more thinking the way he thinks. So I asked him to come on to talk a little bit about where we are and where we're going wrong in terms of how we are dealing with day-to-day reality and how we are fighting back against it. Brett Hamachek is back. He is from Human Events and the Post Millennial, and he is an amazing, smart man that I think can help all of us deal with a little bit better the realities of our day-to-day lives.
It's quite an introduction, Mel. I'm so humbled. I don't know if I can continue. I'll do my best, but it's funny. We were talking before we started, and you said I was going to wind up being your token professor here, or substitute, because you couldn't find one. During the early days of the whole China flu thing, and when we were talking about people needing to socially distance and isolate, and then, well, how far should you really go, and what about turning in your neighbors? I thought it'd be interesting to have a professor of ethics sit down and talk with me about it and do a story at Human Events. So I reached out to one school that I won't name and talked to the head of their department. And when I went through what I wanted to do, he said, I don't know that we have anyone on faculty who's qualified to do it. So that was one extreme. The other, I reached out to a school that's very well known and respected by your audience, I guarantee you. And I got a hold of a professor, and he said, I could do it, but it's such a complex topic that it would take me too long to explain it to you. So what I think I'll do is perhaps I'll write a paper on it. And thank you so much for reaching out. So there's the academic world. It's either too light or too heavy. So let's try to be just right. We'll do a little Goldilocks on this.
Yeah, exactly. A professor of mine, actually, 20 years ago at NYU journalism, he actually had a big problem in the beginning of this, and it really upended his life, because at that same time you were doing this, he teaches a class for 25 years on propaganda at NYU journalism. And he was teaching a class on the pros and cons of masks. But some woke kid in the class said that he was saying that just pick the con side. Meanwhile, they're on Zoom. Just pick the con side, and went to the head of the dean and complained that he was challenging the World Health Organization, CDC, advice on masks. And it turned his life upside down. The NYU turned on him, basically. He's still dealing with it. And I have to tell you, that's what's going on in academia. It seems there's not enough people with courage, and the people with courage are silenced. And a lot of these people have tenure, or they have pensions or whatever. So you know what? Better to have a professor that isn't bought and paid for, or doesn't have to throw their whole pension or their life away. So I'm happy to have you as my token Mel K Show professor.
The token academic.
Yeah.
So I love it.
Because you're not on a side, and that's the best part about you. You're very just common sense oriented. And you and I talked about, I think the biggest problem right now is A, people are not even questioning narratives at all. They'd rather just go along to get along. B, we are in serious trouble because people are doing that. And C, what is critical thinking, and why is nobody using it?
All right. Well, so critical thinking, it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, because really it's not some super well-defined process, but it is being willing to take a serious look at things, to try to move away from, recognize the fact that we have a couple of things that take place in us that we can't help. The first one is our perspective. Right. So our perspective is where we sit as we view something. Imagine, if you will, that we were in a room and there was like a floating object in the middle of it, just a stationary floating object. And then we all had little floating chairs, right, where we could sort of adjust our position in this giant room. Each one of us would be looking at exactly the same thing. However, because of our position where we were, we would have a perspective from which we were seeing it. College professor did this the first day of class in a political science, where he had us all draw a picture of the table that we were sitting at as we saw it. Of course, everybody's picture was different, and we were looking at the same table. That's perspective. The other thing then that we have to recognize is bias. So bias is a product of not just from our perspective, but all the things we've encountered in our life up until that moment. We can think of bias as a sort of glaucoma, right? So it's clouding our view. And so what we need to do is we need to be very aware of the fact that as we see or hear anything, we're seeing it or hearing it from a certain perspective that life's given to us. And then we're also having our view clouded by this notion of a bias that we've sort of accumulated along the way. And I think the first step towards critical thinking is to be aware of those two components, because we have to be able to overcome those in order to start to pull apart and understand what that floating object is in the middle of the room.
Right. And that's in ourselves. That's an inside job. And it seems more and more people are encouraged not to be looking inside themselves by all of the manufactured, in my opinion, division into different groups or clubs or causes or oppressive group or whatever. There's a concerted effort, especially with the, I think, under 30, maybe under 25, whole group of 2 generations of kids that were really told you're part of some kind of group. Your personal thinking should be held to just between you and that voice in your head that you can shut up if you try, but really don't speak too loud about what you think. It's really should be about what everyone agrees to. I did a deep dive into the fact checkers. And I was disgusted to find, first of all, I think they're the worst of the worst because they're not fact checkers. They are 100% financed by Poynter, which is Soros, and Almodovar, and the Council for Countering Digital Hate, and all these groups lead stories. You look at who's financing them, who's involved. They are 100% left-wing, more globalist than left-wing, but they claim to have authority, that they've decided they have authority over truth and facts, but they're not spreading truth and facts. And then you read their fact checks. And the sad part is most people only read the headline, and sadly enough, but then you read the fact check and it's not even about what the person that they're fact checking said. It's like out of context, this and that. What do you make of this new advent? I don't know if it's new, but certainly since the COVID, this fact checking thing that is kind of just shut off all debate somehow.
All right. Well, the fact checking piece is simply explained, right? I mean, that's just good old fashioned sort of fascist control of media and messaging. But I want to take 2 things that you said and attack them both. And the challenges with my old age here, when I do the first, I might forget the second. So do remind me there was a second point.
Okay.
I'm going to talk about the notion of us being divided. So I've written about this back in 2014 or 2015, I lose track of time, and then lectured on it at some conferences around the country. Here's what I would argue. We use the terms right wing and left wing. Those terms are just pejorative terms. They have no real meaning. The political continuum as we've drawn it is nonsensical. If people want more on that, they can go read my old stuff. But the point of it is, you say, how are we organized? What is the structure? I argue that what we have are 2 teams in America, team right and team left. And what we find is that those teams collect platoons. So for example, the pro-choice side is on team left. The pro-life side, they're on team right. Okay, and those 2 platoons are clearly pitted against one another. But it's not that simple, because I said it's a team. So who else is on team left, for example? We have the gun control folks. We have the socialist economic model folks. We have the open border folks. And on team right, we have the antithesis then of all of those, right? And you can go on down the line and you can come up with a number of platoons. Right. So what happens? Let's say that I'm extraordinarily informed about abortion. And let's say that I'm extraordinarily pro-choice as a result. I have it reasoned, understood. I know statistics. I can make the moral argument. I can do all those things. Where do I wind up politically? Well, I wind up on team left. Now, what does it mean that I know about any of the other issues on team left? Right. It doesn't mean anything. I don't. But what do teammates do? They support one another. So what happens is I wind up adopting the positions of my teammates. And when I go to argue them, I'll remember 2 things I heard on TV and I'll say those. And when the third question comes, then I start yelling and screaming, right? I turn up the heat and, and I turn up the volume, because that will compensate for the fact that I don't know what I'm talking about. So we have people now that are on these political teams in America who want to support their teammates, who may only be really knowledgeable or passionate about one issue. So they overcome it through anger and insult and hostility and pejoratives and just axiomatic phrases. We live in this world of sound bites.
Right.
And when you do that, Mel, you're not critically thinking, right? So the opportunity for critical thought, and we'll get to skepticism, I know, in a moment, because that's the trigger for all this. The opportunity for critical thought is to try to get the people who are on one team or another, when an issue presents that isn't in their wheelhouse, right, to get them to stop and admit for a moment, maybe I don't know as much about that as I think that I do, and maybe I should learn more. So there's a window that looks like a wall, but it is a window to walk through if we can then be patient and engage people and get them to think. So second point, with regard to the fact checkers, back to fact checkers, this is kind of fun because we do blame them for everything, and we should. I mean, they're out there to censor. I want to give a real world example from last week about fact checking and other things. Here's what a great tip for your audience. So there was a story, I think it was on Thursday morning, big story. It was on all the local news stuff in Chicago. I think they covered it. It was covered nationally. A study out of Oxford that showed that video game playing did not impact your mood. Okay. Big research, Oxford University. I mean, I've heard of Oxford. That's a pretty big deal, right? So I thought that was interesting. And 39,000 people participated. Well, that sounds pretty compelling too. So I thought I would do something that people don't normally do. I thought I'd read the research. Right. So I went to the report and I read it. And here's the thing. Yeah, there were over 39,000 participants. They were provided to the Oxford research people by the video game companies as active video game players. It's worse than that. And it just actually gets really funny. So not only were they provided by the video game players, but before they participated, they had to fill out a form and they were told what the study was about. So when they went into the study, they knew that their mood was going to be analyzed and how it changed over like a 2-week period.
Oh my God.
Oh, wait. So here comes the punchline. Here comes the punchline. And I thought, all right, I am going to take a look for research on the reliability of research that comes from self-reporting data. Lo and behold, from 2019, I found a study. You'll never guess in a million years where the study was done. It was done at Oxford. You know what the conclusion was? The conclusion was that people that self-report data, it's not very accurate. It's not reliable. The plus or minus, the whole thing is just kaflooey. So what's the point of that story in this context? I heard a story on the news that didn't seem right. It didn't seem intuitively right. And while I didn't know that it was wrong or anything about it, I had skepticism about what it was that I was hearing. Right. And so then what I did is I used some critical thinking to say, I'm going to take the time to find out. I did all of this within under 10 minutes, by the way. Right. And so being skeptical, that notion of saying this doesn't quite seem right, is a first step. But skepticism without action is nothing more than paralysis. And skepticism without action, Mel, can turn into a poison that you and I both know, and that's called cynicism. Right. Yeah. It's funny. I have on my wall in my office that quote by Hannah Arendt that says, the perfect environment for totalitarianism takeover is when the people believe everything and nothing at the same time. Mm-hmm. And I'm seeing a lot of, well, I don't spend that much time on social media, but when I do, I'm only on a few at this point. But when I do, I'm shocked at how negative right now
both sides seem, this is not about sides. Again, I don't even believe in the side paradigm. I think the whole left and right is a total farce. The whole
Right.
Republican Democrat at this point. I don't even think people are just picking sides. They don't even know what it means. Certainly Democrats don't define Democrats anymore. Republicans don't define. So we're all just still playing along with an old paradigm that's hurting us, I think. But I am seeing a lot of skepticism, but not good skepticism. I'm saying it's leaning towards the toxic negative kind, where people don't believe anything. They will believe whatever they want to believe if it fits their whatever mood they're in. But I think that's a real danger right now, because I do think that our country is in trouble and needs to unite, and you can't unite if people are so just unsure of everything at the same time.
Right. And we can't unite unless we're willing to engage with one another. Of course, that's what the Common Ground program's about. You were good enough to have Phyllis and I on your show to talk about.
Yeah, we need to do that on every level.
Right. We do need to do it on every level. So here's part of the problem. One of the things that we hear about on our team all the time is that we're called conspiracy theorists. And everybody will focus on the conspiracy part of that. So, and you and I know that's a term that's been deliberately placed upon people, because the minute you use the word conspiracy, you discredit them.
Right.
All right. And so we understand that that's the attack, and the conspiracy part gets all the attention. But we're here to talk about critical thinking. So let's do that. And let's pay attention to the other word that never gets talked about, and that is the theory or theorists.
Right.
So when we say somebody has a conspiracy theory, I have a sort of a idea of my own, in that Arthur Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes are responsible for ruining America. And the reason they're responsible for ruining America is that, Sherlock Holmes was always saying that he deduced something, right? Well, he didn't deduce much of anything. Mostly what Sherlock Holmes used was inductive reasoning. And so that meant he would look around a crime scene and he'd see a bunch of different things.
A whole website that is just people. It would be hard to, you would have to pick the people. You have one, Human Events, but it would have to be like both sides of the argument research. But like you said, you can't take away the bias, the perspective, your experience. So give two people that are totally different and have them really look at the facts, and they'll probably be different, but maybe they won't be. But we're not even trying that anymore.
Right. Well, and what we do have to understand is that facts are facts. Critical theory aside, facts are objective things that actually exist. And there's always some finite number of them. It doesn't matter whether we're just looking at the mass of some lump in our hand of something, or whether we're talking about a complex situation. There are certain facts, they are objective, and there's a limited number of them. And some of them are knowable and some of them aren't knowable. So here's the thing. If you send a couple of people out, and they're the best of intentions, and you say, I want you to research topic X, and you're going to 3 days, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about it. What we would get is that one person would come back with a set of facts, and so would the other. And some of the facts they would have found the same, and some of them they would have found differently. And then there would have been some facts that neither one of them found at all, right? That's the universe.
Right.
So that's how hard it is. So you take well-intentioned people committed to truth and honesty and discourse, and at best, they will sit down and engage with incomplete information. They won't have all of it. So all of us then have this obligation to one another to recognize that fact. When I sit down with you and we're about to tackle an issue, I have to start by saying, I know some things that she doesn't know. She knows some things that I don't know. And there are things that neither one of us know.
Right.
And if we started from that paradigm, then we could engage. Because you know what that creates? That creates a sort of intellectual humility.
Right.
Where all of a sudden, I'm not better than you. I'm the same as you, except to the extent we know some different stuff. It's like, and so we should always start out a conversation by saying, tell me what you know, right? And that should be where we start. Not tell me what you think. Tell me what you know. and then I should do the same. And then we should start to be able to piece it together. And that's how critical thinking can take place constructively between participants, is to work from that premise.
Yeah, I mean, that's where the ego comes in. I was talking to a scientist the other day about some of this new stuff coming out that might be all wrong about, some disease that they've been treating one way forever. He's really a scientist that does this for a living. He said it's really hard in his business to say anything is fraud, because everything in any scientific study could be accident, or there could be factors that were wrong through the experiments. But then you add in the money and the grants and the university behind it and this and that. A lot of times at the end of the day, when somebody is wrong and there's those kind of stakes, that their ego will take over and they're not going to admit it. And that could really be detrimental to, millions of people suffering from something that has wrong data or wrong information, which we're finding right now. I hear they're really going to crack down on the climate emergency stuff. But, I only know what I've been told, and I hear this and that, and I wanted to look up all the facts on CO2 and what's really going on. I know about the net zero agenda. I know a lot about what's behind it, but I wanted to see this both sides. And what happened to a lot of these scientists, I mean, real scientists with great backgrounds, that came out and said, no, the CO2 is really, we need it.
Right.
And it's really important. These people's lives were destroyed, but the facts are there. I mean, there was like 10,000 different scientists from all over the world basically say that their lives were destroyed since the 90s, the Kyoto Treaty and all that. Since that started, you and I know Club of Rome, my audience knows limits of growth, but I'm talking about that this happened before the doctors of COVID and the researchers of COVID got destroyed.
Right.
So it's like, we have, I wonder where this is coming from. I don't think it's human nature. I think it's manipulated, but now it's like you're a climate denier or you're an anti-vaxxer. No, maybe you looked at the facts and you thought, well, this doesn't make sense or that doesn't make sense. So you look into it, and then God forbid you look into it and you come up with a different thing. Then there's this mob that attacks you. It's just really very, just looking at a lot of the things that happen to these climate people that came out with very obvious stuff, their lives destroyed, just like, a lot of the frontline doctors. Simona goes in jail, so what's your take on that? I mean, where are we as humanity that this is where we are?
So I think there's a lot of things at work here. And I do think it actually comes down to human nature. So let's talk about skepticism for a moment. So being a skeptic means that you have a willingness to not simply accept things that are posited in front of you as being true, absent proof. I mean, the greatest skeptic of all time was David Hume. And David Hume set out to destroy philosophy. He did that. And when he was done, he said, but don't be too skeptical or you can't even function in your life. Right. So, so we need that ability to be skeptical and to question. But then a lot of different things happen. First of all, people in general aren't necessarily willing to accept, even though they'll say, yeah, there's bad people. They aren't generally willing to accept this sort of nefarious streak that's in human nature. I'm a Hobbesian. Over here on my wall that you can't see, just beyond the Stallone picture, is Thomas Hobbes hanging on the wall. I like to say that Hobbes was right and Freud was righter. So I think that we do have to acknowledge that there's some darkness inside of us. So oftentimes you can get somebody to be willing to be skeptical, but they will only go so far. They'll be skeptical to say, I think that I need to look into that more because the person could be mistaken. Right. What they don't do as easily as say, I need to look into that because the person telling it to me is lying. Because that presents a confrontation with what you have to accept about the potential nature of man, right? So people can be skeptical when they think there's a mistake, but they're less inclined to be skeptical if they think somebody would be manipulating them for a nefarious purpose. So that swipes left on more than half the population to be skeptical in the first place, right?
Yeah.
And then once when you start to take a look at when you look at it from that perspective, and if you're willing to be skeptical, and if you're willing to be probative and think critically, then you run into the fact that, as I would argue, the nature of man isn't terribly good. So imagine what happens when you're skeptical, and you're skeptical about something that doesn't seem right, but it isn't right not because the person was mistaken. It's because they were being intentionally misleading.
Right.
So now the skeptic walks full force into that evil side of humanity, and they can put themselves at risk and get destroyed.
Right.
That's why people will pull their punch, and that's why people will only go so far. Sort of the classic scene where in the movie where the person says to the other, I can't do this anymore with you, right? Because now the cost is getting too great. And so then we're left with the lone hero to go out and triumph against the bad guys.
Yeah.
But that's the problem with skepticism, is that if we're going to engage in that willingness to question, then we have to understand that we're questioning more than just mistakes. We also have to be willing to question intent. And if we run into intent, we have to be willing to pay the price for taking that on. Right.
That's really interesting. Yeah. That's a big problem with what's going on, what happened already with the COVID,
Right.
All of that. But I was reading a whole thing by the guy who created Greenpeace. I can't remember his name right now, but he had changed his
I know
mind.
who you mean.
He had changed his mind and really, and I was reading about what happened with him and how many people came after him and anyone that was saying this. And if we keep doing that, and then now we have the advent of online. You happen to work at Human Events, a great website. We'll put the links below, obviously, and all of Brent's links. But I have to say, both Jack Posobiec and Charlie Kirk are partners of yours, and I have to say, both of them don't care.
Right.
They don't care.
They don't care.
So they're like heroes of people like me that, people come out at, that there's a professional troll market or the fact checkers, whatever. But those two don't care, so there's I think something that's very motivate, like that's it gives you some kind of, what do you think that is? Because I think too many people, they know the consequences of being out there and saying unpopular things, and they step back. And look at how successful both of them, include you as well, but both of them have become because they're not afraid of being attacked or being wrong. Even I've seen them both at times admit that they were wrong. So what is that a lot of people don't have?
Well, I think on some level, it's just as simple as one of the 4 fundamental virtues. It's good old-fashioned courage. Some of your audience probably knows. I know that I'm working on finishing now Dr. Zelenko's book. I started the project together, and he passed away a month ago. And but we had 70 hours of interviews and pulling it all into a text that'll be finished and ready to go to the publisher soon. I can't imagine in my lifetime meeting a man who is more courageous, and it's a product of circumstance. So from Zeb's perspective, and people will be able to read this in more detail in his book, but he's a guy, if you ever met him, he was about 2 feet tall, and
no, I have. I know.
Not exactly what you'd call Navy SEAL caliber. In fact, that's what he said. He always admired the military, he admired those men, but God didn't give him the physical gifts. And when the China flu hit, and suddenly he was able to figure out how to treat the disease and step forward and faced all of the resistance that he did and the ridicule that's so well known. What did he do? He kept going. And he didn't just keep going, he kept going with terminal cancer. And this is extraordinary. So you say, how do you explain people like this who are willing to do it? I think that it's as simple as it is complex. I think it's a function of courage, which is a virtue. And this ability to understand that what you're doing, you're simply willing to do it at any cost.
Right.
Now, there's an argument, that the arguments say that Hegel made, since you love philosophy, that these kinds of people are actually being used by history. The history sort of takes them and they impact change, they move the dialectic forward, but they're just being actually used and spit out by it, right? That they're tools of change that get discarded. Sadly, there's some truth to that. I think Hegel was kind of onto something, right? Because we often see that the courageous players don't necessarily get the recognition for their efforts during their time here on Earth, but it comes later on. But they do shape and move history.
Right.
So I'm inspired by people who are willing to act and set aside their own personal well-being to do that.
Yeah, because I mean, it's a different world now. I've talked to, obviously, Dr. Zelenko about it, and other people. I mean, there's many people, you and I included, but honestly, that the mob mentality that everything has transitioned into, very much encouraged by social media, obviously. But you know, I do feel like we are kind of at a place where there's enough going wrong that enough people are questioning, finally, in one way or another, that things do not seem right. Whether it's your take on Ukraine and Russia and the inability, the only one side of it is okay to hear, and or you know what, to me was like the shocking thing of all of this situation was we went right from the COVID to like the Ukraine thing, and suddenly American people are hating Russian people as if it was I'm saying, because I studied a lot about Nazi Germany, World War II, but really all the way back to the 20s and 30s before World War I, which set up World War II, thinking, wait a minute, the whole American, it seemed like, and at least in the media, social media, went straight on canceling Russian actors, Russian writers, Russian food, Russian athletes, Russian musicians, not knowing the history of Russia at all or what Russia has done for America. But I'm sitting there thinking, it was so fast and so overnight. What did you make of that when that was going down?
Well, we're right back to human nature, aren't we?
Yeah.
So, with regard to the piece in the China flu, we learned a lot about ourselves, right? And we learned how quickly that we were willing to turn on each other. We learned how quickly we were willing to become sort of sheep-like. I mean, as Christians, we're meant to follow a shepherd, but we were following the wrong one, right?
Right.
And so that didn't go so well. But what's really interesting about the China flu part of it is the legitimate refusal of people to be skeptical and think critically. Because while there were people like Dr. Zelenko right away, like you and my friend Keith Rose, who had it figured out pretty quick.
Right.
There were people willing to do that. For the most part, under the bell curve, most people just sat back and accepted. And so here's another problem with being skeptical, and that is that if you are skeptical, what is about to confront you can actually just sort of shake your entire world and make you so uncomfortable that it could be difficult to move on. We saw this especially with the China flu. Here's why. So what we know now is a fact. I mean, it is a fact now. We know that there is an easy way to treat this disease. The studies have shown it's proven it. So it's no longer a hypothesis. It's actually now a solid theory, right? So we're good. And yet, so every doctor in the country knew this at least by the end of 2020. They didn't treat people. So now let's say you're a regular citizen. You're looking at all this and you're saying, I don't think that my doctor was doing what he knew he should do to try to save my husband's life.
Right.
Well, so for most people, the thing they fear losing the most is their life, right? And so you fear losing your life. And so it means I want to stay healthy. Well, who keeps you healthy? Your doctor keeps you healthy. What happens if you start to skeptically view the behavior of your doctor and start to think critically about what they have done,
Right.
what they didn't do, now all of a sudden, the only thing that protects you in that fear of dying, which was your faith in the medical profession, now it sort of goes away. And it's much, much easier to just say, how many times do you hear somebody when you're presenting them with an uncomfortable argument say, I don't want to hear it. I just,
Right. Oh
I
my
just
God.
can't hear that.
Constant.
Right. I
Yeah.
can't hear it. Well, there's a reason I can't hear it.
Right.
Because if you hear it, you can't unhear it. And if you can't unhear it, you're forced to confront it. And then that can get extraordinarily difficult. As to the Ukraine-Russian thing and American reaction to it, look, it's been disgraceful. I mean, it's just been disgraceful.
Right. It's unbelievable to me.
Right. What individual citizens have been willing to do to other citizens who are simply here from Russia is grotesque. And our sort of our leadership's bloodthirsting to try to get involved in the war. Look, Lindsey Graham, if you want to get involved, pick up a rifle and man a post.
Exactly. That's how I feel about all of them now.
Right. And so, but again, back to the sort of at the topic, this notion of skepticism and critical thinking. Most people accept, again, under a bell curve, people have accepted axiomatically that the Russians are the bad guys and so on, because the Russians have been the bad guys since 1917. So we have Russian villain fixation. And to get rid of it requires some work. And oh, by the way, I need to go to work today and I've got to pick up the laundry on the way home and grab dinner and then feed the kids. So how much work do I want to put in this to questioning 100 years of knowledge that Russia's the bad guy? Right. It's easier to just accept it.
Right. You know, it's that, what's it that Mark Twain, I think, said, it's easier to fool somebody than convince them they've been fooled. But really, it's more about to convince them to even listen to the notion that they may have been fooled. But that's where we are, because, you know, we're watching it every day. And, you know, what with Biden, he's got 2 shots, 2 boosters, Pavlovic's, has COVID again. And the CDC and FDA and the mainstream media is still saying, get your boosters and all that. You know, they won't say anything about monkeypox. You know, it's just so much. I just feel like if you're not thinking on one level or another that something's wrong, or recession has been redefined and everything's fine. Paul Krugman in his pathetic on you know, with the shelter, what is his name, Stelter, sitting there being like, there's no recession, you don't know. I mean, it's like, it's this cognitive dissonance. It's like we're in a relationship with it's like an overlord thing that's like Big Brother that's really, really abusive and like a narcissist trying to gaslight us at every turn. But I believe more and more people are waking up. But again, here's the crazy part. We have a couple generations that weren't taught critical thinking, weren't taught real history, weren't taught cause and effect, weren't taught, you know, this happened and this happened and this happened and these dots all connected to have this happen, not even to think that way. A lot of the best books, a lot of the best history books you grew up with, I grew up with, are gone. And some of them were probably all phony. But here's the thing. So there's people watching my show right now that are seeing things at this point. Right. That they know something is off. If they watch me, they already get that everything is off. But let's say that it's somebody that doesn't know either of us. And you're very skilled at this. You're an excellent writer for decades. Thank you. How would you explain to somebody that doesn't know where to start? That's how bad I think it is in terms of at least the university level education. I'd like to say when I went, it was still okay, but 2000, mid 2000s back, where would somebody start if they say, for the first time they're seeing something and they're saying, whatever it is, you can pick something, and they're saying, that doesn't make sense. And we know that Google and Wikipedia are manipulated for them and the fact checker. Where would somebody that's just a layman and has maybe a half hour at night that they usually spend doing, looking at clothes or something on the or sports stats on the internet, actually wants to go and be a skeptic? Right. Where do they start?
That's a really fun question. Let's do something with that and let's make it really specific. So First of all, I'm a big believer in the notion of habits. You know, I make no secret, I'm a recovery guy. I used to be a really good drunk, and now I'm really good at being sober.
That's a great
And
thing to be good at.
yeah, you know, and I was one of the greatest of all time. I mean, you've heard of high functioning. I was really high functioning.
Wow.
I was like Clint Eastwood in The Unforgiven when he needed to go kill everybody and he went to the bar and drank a bottle of whiskey. That
Hey,
was me before an important meeting, right? So, but anyway, that and addiction's not a disease; it's a habit, and I can say it because I'm an addict. And when you say it's a disease, it's nonsense. So it's all about habits.
right.
So let's create a habit. Take every day, take one story that you listen to in the news or you read about on your handheld device, and say, I am going to spend 30 minutes looking into this, right? And don't just pick a story at random. Pick one that actually seems like, that's odd. Embrace your natural skepticism. So don't force yourself to be a skeptic. Start slow, training wheels here. And if it seems, man, that doesn't make sense, okay, spend 30 minutes and take a look. And you're right about Google and suppressing search results. I got to tell you, the information I found the other day about the study out of Oxford, that was all through Google search bar on my phone. On the
Right.
same day, by the way, you mentioned the recession thing. And the exact same morning, they were doing the story about the second quarter in a row of GDP growth going negative. And so after I was done spending a few minutes doing the whole, you know, video games don't hurt you thing, then I played around with that. And I'm an economics major, so I have a head start, right? So I get this. I thought, all right, I'm going to go and take a look. Last recession, defined as 2020, was only lasted 2 months. Why was it a recession then? A recession because there's an official body that actually defines recessions. They did that in the spring of 2021. I learned how that board is actually put together and how they make their decisions. This could be ruled a recession, but it won't be for another year or two. And it does depend on how long it'll last, because they won't start looking at it really until it's over. What's the point? 10 minutes, 10
Right.
minutes on Google.
Well, you can do
So,
it on Google. I think it depends. I think people are pretty clear on what
sure.
search results are hidden on there. But still, you're saying like you just ask the next question and then
Right.
look for
And
it.
spend 30 minutes a day and develop a habit of saying, I'm going to take a little bit of time each day and I'm going to take a look. And once you develop that habit,
Right.
then here's the super important thing to keep in mind is that this, when you discover, you know, we'll go back to that notion of conspiracy hypothesis, because they're not theories, they're hypotheses.
Right.
Once you get the hypothesis, once you discover that this seemingly is likely not true, once you've gone through enough stoplights, right, to figure out it's mostly safe, or enough green lights, I should say. But then the question is, what are you going to do? And one of the reasons why this whole world that we're in, where we do talk about conspiracy theories, one of its weaknesses has been it's been like its own sort of information terrarium, right? So everybody inside of it's like, look what we found, and I got this, and so it's all right there, but it's all locked inside. So then the question is, okay, so you have a hypothesis, and boy, it seems like a strong one. But now what are you going to do with it?
Right.
And that's the challenge then to people who are going to take this exercise suggestion, perhaps, and think critically once a day and tear something apart, is once you learn it, what will you do with it?
Right.
Because otherwise it becomes the ultimate definition of sort of useless knowledge. And so it's got to always be then about the action.
Right.
Tied to the wisdom that you've picked up. But I think that'd be a fun thing for people to
Yeah,
do.
and that's what I think that the truth is, the action, because it doesn't have to be something that's controversial. It can be something that just looks odd to you or you want to know more about, and then share that. Because, you know, people saying, you know, I can't do a podcast like you, or I can't do this, or who cares? So just write a little, you know, you can do so much with it, with any knowledge that is interesting these days, because people are dying, I think, for information and knowledge. People die. Look, I probably spend 15 hours a day reading
Right.
everything I can. But I do have to say that there's you know, it's funny, you brought up a couple times hypothesis and stuff, because I keep having an issue with, trust the science, or we
Right.
had that with Greta, and then we had that with Fauci, and we still have it.
Mhm.
And it's like, but what about the scientific method? It's not about
Right.
trusting the science. So again, it's all of these things. The scientific method is that you have a hypothesis, but it's continually tested, and anyone can test it at any time that they want if they come up with all the parameters. And I think it's more about thinking, wanting to think.
Right.
There's an anti-thinking mechanism going on that suggestion you just made. I challenge everyone that's watching this to do that, and then send me an email and tell me like what you found.
The results of the experiment. Yeah.
Yeah, because maybe we get, if anyone does that, do it for at least a week, and then send me your if it's changing the way you're looking at stuff. Because I think if you start small, like you're suggesting, it becomes a habit of questioning stuff, and we have to start questioning stuff, because I think we're going to see a lot of, now this will jump more to what's going on in real time right now, but that's an excellent thing. Anyone who's watching this that does that, please send me emails to your experience, what you're choosing to look at. It's kind of interesting to me too, and what you're finding, and what method you're using to kind of decipher through all of the external, to find your own take on stories out there that you question or you're skeptical about, and you're finding information on. That's an excellent thing, and I'd love to see that. But now, as far as we are right now, like I said, we have a lot of people out there, and I don't think it's left or right. I do believe people are exhausted. I think people have been beaten down. That Kazmarov guy that from the KGB defector with David Icke. I like that interview where he talks about the 4 stages.
Right. Right. A great favorite of Dr. Zelenko's, by the way.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Good. And yeah, but how right that guy was. So it took 20 years to demoralize a country, and I think we're past that, and that's really sad to me. But that is what I see when I see what's happened, and then I look at my little sliver of social media, and I'm talking about, like, all sides. Where do we go with that?
Well, look, there's a clip that I actually, the way my Android phone is, if I open a tab in Chrome, it'll stay there till I close it. So sometimes I have an index of like 70 tabs that are open. One of them I opened up a while ago was this woman who was testifying before Congress about, she's a mother and she needs more leave, and she says, we're just so tired, and we're worn out, and we need more government help. We can't do it all. And all I could think of as I watched that and saved it, because it was so just repulsive, was, this is not Sparta.
Right.
And if people are worn out and too tired, I just have one simple piece of advice: get over it. The idea that you're worn out and tired because things have been tough and the world seems against you and nobody's telling the truth, stop it. Just stop it. We have most of human history, except for the last 6 minutes of it, has been lived in such austere and harsh and horrible environments, that what we're living in today gives us all the physical comfort we can imagine to spend some time and get informed and take action and quit feeling overwhelmed. Don't need a Xanax. You just need a smartphone and a willing mind. Do a little research, communicate with people, figure out what you're going to do to be part of the solution, and go do it.
Yeah.
Because if you're worn out and tired, imagine how the next generation is going to feel.
Right,
And,
exactly.
so
or, how did they feel in 1773 and 1770?
Right. We're so soft. I mean, it's like we're all the Pillsbury Doughboys, right? And it's just awful. You want to just walk up to people and kind of push your finger in a little bit.
Yeah.
And
so yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so people have to man up, and they also have to realize that, there's a real need to be able to take the knowledge that they accumulate and then to try to do something with it. And, and just a general warning on knowledge, one of the other things, going back to logic, I think it'd be really important if every American could take a logic course, and you can probably take them online for free, for all I know, or watch a YouTube video. But one of the things we do, and I'm going to use an example that might not be the best with the audience, just a simple one, and it just popped into my head. It might even be a bad one because it might all actually be true. But here's what we do. So we take a look at all of the evidence that's been presented, and we kind of come to a hypothesis, because he never stood trial, but that Jeffrey Epstein was involved in sex trafficking, and he was involved in it with young people, right? And so then what we do is that we turn into the Sherlock Holmes that he was supposed to be, the deductive part. And we see Jeffrey Epstein was involved very clearly in child sex trafficking. Bill Clinton hung out with Jeffrey Epstein. So Bill Clinton's a pedophile. Now, he might be. I'm making the point for a reason, because what we have to be careful of, if we want to persuade people, we want to make sure that if we're using deductive reasoning, we have two valid premises. Because if we don't, we're just going to chase people away.
Right.
And we're not going to be able to persuade them. Because if our answer is, how do we know Clinton's a pedophile? And we say it's because he hung out with Epstein, even a 4-year-old can pull that apart.
Right.
And it doesn't mean it isn't true. I'm not, to be clear to your audience, I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just using it as an example.
Right. It's a good example. Everyone thought that at one time or another, I'm sure.
Well, look, critical thinking involves being self-critical. It's as Ayn Rand would say, my favorite back there on the wall. By the way, behind my head is Hannah Arendt's Totalitarianism book. You just can't really see it because it's behind me. But I put it up in tribute to you today.
Oh, thank you. Yes, so, I always have it next to me.
One of Ayn Rand's great simple 3-word things was check your premises.
Yeah.
And so to think critically, it begins with skepticism. It continues with the discipline and the diligence to think and dig. And then it concludes with critical thinking about checking your own premises so that you can be sort of logically tight. You paid a nice compliment to me at the beginning about just being sort of intellectually honest, and however you put it, and that's what it meant. And I take extraordinary pride in that intellectual honesty is so important, that we can't view things just simply in the context of what pleases us or what gives us confirmation bias, where we heard what we wanted to hear, right? We read what we wanted to read. So we're done, we've stopped, and we'll make the argument from that point. We can't do that. We owe it to ourselves to be intellectually honest. It's kind of like when I became Catholic, I went to theology school at the master's level, studied with the Jesuit priests. Some of them got sweet on me. It's a different story. One in particular I remember. The point is, he was not my target demographic, by the way, in case your audience is wondering. The point of it is, why did I do that? I didn't need to do that. I mean, I became Catholic. I was all set. It's because I wanted to fully understand the faith I had just joined, and I wanted to understand it really warts and all. So I wanted the history. I wanted the abuses and excesses. I wanted to know the revisions. I wanted to understand all of it, because I knew if I could come out of that process and still land as a Catholic, then I was on pretty good footing, right? And I would be able to honestly and intellectually defend my faith and accept a criticism when it was presented to me. If somebody said, the Inquisition was terrible, and I know there's Inquisition apologists, which sounds so funny, but yeah, the Inquisition was terrible, right? And you have to acknowledge it's a real part of church history. There were different parts to it, right? And the whole bit. But in the end, this above all to thine own self be true. And that is the last piece of that critical thinking loop that you have to close, because failure to close it can leave you with a lot of inconclusive conclusions and incorrect ones, I think.
Yeah, the one thing that you mentioned through this whole thing that I've been thinking for a long time, because I know a lot about it, being in recovery, I think we all kind of need a 12-step program right now.
Right.
I feel like everyone is kind of at once, in one way or another, addicted, or, or if not addicted, grasping to something. They have different kinds of recovery. They have AA, NA, but they also have it for codependency, and they have it for, sex addiction or whatever. It still goes back to the same premise of you got to meet you where you are and really be honest with yourself. You talk about intellectual honesty. and being to thy own self be true. And I do feel like we kind of, well, your common ground thing is a good beginning ground for a fellowship type thing, where for me, with my experience in my life, especially when I lived in Hollywood and all of that, recovery is a very big thing there. And I think it's a big part of it is about fellowship and about getting around people that has nothing, that you have nothing in common. But once you walk in that room, everyone's on the same page. Everyone's equal. It's somehow, it's the miracle of AA, in my opinion, is you can walk in those rooms and immediately everything you left outside and everyone's on the same page and everyone's kind of, you know, there for the next guy. And it's like, I feel like the whole world, our whole country needs like a new, like a, you know, modern day Bill W. just for the addiction psychosis we're dealing with right now. But you know, if we could take all those concepts and people went back and, you know, even like people don't know, but there's like a fourth step where you really go into yourself and you really you figure out, you know, it takes people years and it's very hard for a lot of people, but it really does, it's life-changing. And you know, just to end on that, I feel like the whole, that we're kind of all at a place where everyone kind of needs some kind of recovery. Anyone that's awake. You know? Well,
there's you know, doing a fearless searching moral inventory of ourselves is always a good idea, regardless of your issues. I once was standing in a public men's room. This is a place where you probably don't have a lot of experience, and standing at what we guys call a pee trough, which is where you don't have a separate urinal. It's this big long bowl, and everybody just steps up and goes. And the guy next to me, I guess, was desperate for conversation. And he said, you know, this is the great equalizer. No matter who a guy is, no matter how much money he's got, what he does for a living, we're all the same at the pee trough, right? And the rooms of recovery are like that as well. So pee troughs and 12-step programs are the same. I'm the only guest you'll ever have that makes that point. But here's the important side of that. And that is, if we really want to turn things around, we can't turn them around on a treadmill. And so simply walking in place with others who see and agree and feel like we do isn't going to work. And you know, I have people saying, I'm sure you do, they'll say, I don't want to talk to these people. I don't want to. I want to fight with them, you know, or I'm done with them. And you can say that, and I get it, but we'll lose. So because we can't, they control all the major positions in this country right now. So they're very well placed strategically. So our need is to try to engage them and to try to create on some level that atmosphere that exists in a 12-step room. And now we're right back sort of where we started when I was this idea of facts. And just, I can't emphasize it enough. The next time you're going to sit down with somebody where they, you know, you don't agree with them, think that you know some things, they know some things, and there are some things that neither one of you know. And there only are a limited number, a finite number of things to know. Facts are finite, they're not infinite. So if you're going to start down already before you even begin to speak, and you're going to have that sort of imperfection inherent in your conversation, then it means you ought to be willing enough to think critically about what they're saying, see what you can learn from them, do the same for them. And then maybe, just maybe, you can, I don't know, find some common ground.
Ah, see, there you go, Professor. You're the Mel K show favorite professor. You'll be back soon. I'll have another topic. Tell my audience where they can find you. And also, when you are done with Dr. Z's book, and you can, please come back and discuss it. I want everyone to read it. He's a hero of mine and is of millions, but will be a lot more once your book comes out and people really understand who and what he represents.
I will give you my promise right now.
Great.
Because I'm guessing when this comes out, there's going to be, you know, I'm no big deal, but I am the guy still around who's, you know, co-writing it. So there's going to be requests. You have my word. You will be the first interview.